This will be quite a long lecture because I'm trying to locate what I'm talking about always in kind of totalizing, at least in terms of totalizing system of thinking, which moves through various levels of reflection. No, this is not very nice. Can this be switched off?
You go on and I try to find the button.
Okay. And the key theme of this presentation is thinking and the dependency on schemata of thinking on architecture. The title of the lecture was Conceptual, Social and Spatial Structures, or Forms of Order. And this particular lecture will focus on schemata of order, logical constructs through which we think and represent to us experience. In this sense, it is straight, you could argue, part of a philosophical reflection, but I also think that it has transpired that indeed something like philosophy, the reflections on general aspects of intellectual representation, schemata of logic, etc., has to step out of its kind of abstract realm and reflect on its own material structures through which it thinks. There has been quite recently, a kind of, after the kind of linguistic turn where thinking understood its dependency on language and systems of sign, a kind of further body turn, the dependency on language, on certain material stratums through which it operates. So when I'm looking at a certain presentation I'm talking about, I build in immediately the reflection on the modes of representation through which I make that argument, because we are, and it's not accidental, we are thinking a lot through images, but not only we, but generally that culture. And through, so when we're talking about here, on the one hand, I want to start talking about settlement patterns as material processes in this world which I want to assimilate to, let's say, pseudo-natural processes. I could talk about these patterns represent, I'm looking at them as if a kind of scientist, like a biologist would look at certain morphologies, like a kind of a geologist would look at certain crystallizations, certain structures as a material process in this world. And you can see that you can sort of, look at them like bacteria colonies across the whole globe. Certain patterns and a certain stage in the development of civilization occur and crystallize, which were quite distinct, but repetitive. And on the scale on that occurs and repeats itself, there must be a hidden agenda, because there isn't a kind of conspiracy theory which would explain this the occurrence of this pattern. So I'm talking about material structures in this world which we call cities, in which we engage, but I'm also talking about patches of black and white, a kind of reliance on making that representation through distributing black versus white with a certain in a certain space and a certain surface. These are the So my first chapter is trying to see the material operations of architecture, urban settlement, but also of thinking. I mean, how am I making that argument? And we'll come back to that. Why that is important. Say there's one more thing in advance that there has been, in this reflection upon means of representation and material means of working, there has been a lot of change and breakthroughs and progress in our profession in the last 20 years. So it matters. It's not just a kind of an interest. It becomes a tool. But again, if you look back in time, another 500 years, instead of these mega patches and these kind of metropolitan kind of conglomerations, human civilization took this kind of form of crystallization, quite other, kind of very, very small nodes crystallizing out of a kind of an agricultural landscape in a kind of metabolism which I would call, it's a kind of town countryside metabolism of the feudal order of reproduction, material reproduction, which is indeed, as one work, it is all kind of repetitive over and over, but each of these kind of local crystallizations which don't make much of a system between themselves. And I think that we would easily understand that if you compare these two morphologies, late 20th century agglomerations on the one hand and medieval patterns of architectural and urban morphologies, that there is something very deep and profound going on. These are totally different ways in which these civilizations reproduce themselves materially. And what I'm trying to keep that point of view going all the way to understand current shifts in morphology which we witness. Just going through that, there's one profound shift in history from the medieval period to the Baroque. That's how we know it's, let's say, stylistically, is that this kind of bound figure of the city, which was a piece of architectural order which crystallized more or less kind of unplanned on certain points, and against the kind of much less structured landscape, is broken through, whereby a national economy was established, and larger administrative centers had to be organized, and the landscape was architecturalized. It was kind of dissected through canals, road systems, etc. And it was expressed by this kind of. It was gridded out like in the first occurrence of the Renaissance in around Venice. The landscape was kind of occupied by the urban civilization, was cut up, cultivated, architecturalized. And you have these architectures which structure the landscape all the way to the horizon as being the indication of another economy, which is in this case establishment of a kind of nationally integrated economy with much larger trade and the division of labor across the nation state. And another thing which was occurring, and if this is the kind of 17th century, in the 18th century, through the Industrial Revolution, you have yet another radically other morphology cropping up in the landscape, which is kind of this is kind of centralized, mercantilist, kind of planned economy and trade relations, and here we're starting to have the emergence of capitalism and the free upshots and chaotic growth of industrial centers which break the power at that stage of the feudally organized society, and you have this free form agglomerations. And I mention that because at the same time you have another aesthetic armature and canon emerging, which starts to reject the sterility, and that's where it starts to be discussed, of these kind of ordered landscapes, and calls for, in effect, in somebody like Berlage, for kind of tumultuous, chaotic, lively agglomerations as the vital, as the beautiful effect, as the aesthetics of the picturesque is one of those moments where sooner or later somebody had to come forward and aestheticize, this picks up on what the quote which we presented with, had to aestheticize these new morphologies, and whoever that would be would represent vital interest and vital forces, and would gain an audience, and the that which was no longer a summary or formalized, dogmatized principle of let's say, the Baroque way of organizing the landscape, at that stage could no longer be maintained, would have become a kind of untenable dogma which insists on finding comfort and value in an anachronistic metabolism, as it were. And the next stage is, of course, the restructuring of an initially kind of chaotic capitalism through a concentration process and these large kind of mass production systems of Fordism, which is another kind of stage in the development of productivity. Each of these stages establishes it's a larger and superior form of production, which creates this product and reproduction universe, and in architecture it creates this formal language which we got used to under notions of international styles, notions of seriality and etc. So on that, on the back of this kind of reflection of what might be the hidden motive force of the transformation of our urban morphologies, I will look at the latest kind of shock which this discipline suffered in terms of its aesthetic codes, which is something which was only kind of struggled through intensely actually when I was a student in the mid-80s, that the modernist aesthetic was challenged by postmodernism, and but I would argue that this from a materialist perspective, so these up to now I'm kind of presenting the hypothesis or the kind of principle of investigation which I call materialism, that the what occurs in this world, whether it's on the level of aesthetic regimes, ideas, is part of a material metabolism, and that remains a selection criterion on what occurs or maintains itself. That we would have suddenly this regime of Fordism and the landscape which is built in its image, as it were, as this kind of serialized, zoned mass production cities, is transformed into something which starts to look like that, something which is much more internally differentiated, much more agglomerative and contradictory. And that precedes what then is formalized occurs in the discipline, in the high art of architecture, with this typical delay factor as some protagonists come forward and re-aestheticize the inevitable. And of course that's precisely these kind of manifestos which are retroactive, like learning from Manhattan, learning from Las Vegas, etc. So that is a chapter where I say materialism is a way of getting an understanding of what is the motive force behind stylistic revolutions, and that there is a hypothesis, therefore, that this stylistic revolution, which is represented here, and that's what we work on also proving in our studio, is because the way it used to look doesn't work anymore. We have another kind of reproduction system called post-Fordism, and I don't want to get too much into it, which in this lecture, which starts to appear like this, first of all, chaotic to us, but they're hidden structures which we can investigate. And but this idea of materialism is not just the core principle of getting an understanding and therefore lever upon aesthetic regimes and stylistic canons, but it is also, and that's what this lecture is mainly about, a root principle to thinking itself. What is let's say, a civilized higher form of thinking? What is its material basis and substratum? And that there is such means that we don't assume anymore that thinking is this kind of otherworldly type of logic which appears in the ether of pure thought as a kind of unconstrained and gravityless realm of absolute freedom where anything could be thought, as it were, but that thinking itself has to be analyzed as a material process, as an effect of a certain organismic organization, based, and I would argue, it's a social process first of all, but it's a social, but the social process itself is a metabolism of which the human organism organizes collectively with the way it engages with nature through division of labor and certain tools and techniques. And what we're looking at here, the first occurrences of something which we could call philosophy or a higher form of thinking and abstract thinking, these kind of cosmologies, I want to offer the hypothesis that it is not accidental. What is the relationship between this kind of idea of the universe and a certain city structure? I mean, traditionally one might think and it has been, that cities are sometimes, and certain architectures, let's say Renaissance architecture, is a kind of embodiment of the idea of a cosmic order, this way around. So that I call idealism. There's a sense where, and in art history, you would find that this is all about, this is built like this because it symbolizes a prior thought, which is a kind of sense, a philosopher's thought of a cosmology. My argument here is reversing that cosmology or any kind of schemata of thinking something is nothing but a kind of reflex and depends on a prior material structure which have never been thought originally, but crystallizes out of like a kind of shell crystallizes in the seabed, as it were. Because what I'm arguing here, of course, is that let's say assimilate this level of civilization to kind of semi-animal state, and you have a certain hordes and tribes settling. I mean, going away from hunting and gathering and living hand and mouth, and starting, let's say, to settle. To try and error process through going back to certain plants and seeding, or that you would start to establish boundaries, you start to establish territory, you start to establish permanent houses. At that, it's not possible. You're not in a nomadic lifestyle, and you start to try to congregate and aggregate a certain social body, and you'll do that through try and error on the kind of, like a soap bubble crystallized in water. You would have nearly inevitable in a trial and error process certain concentric figures occurring. Because if you want to shield, if you want to crystallize out, this will be the most economical figure. If you, let's say, and you could nearly think of it as an evolution process where there might have been an attempt to kind of build something which was kind of lopsided, elongated, and the wall would fall down. And so they think about this as an absolutely blind, unthought of, crystallizing try and error process, which at a higher, very late stage looks like that, which then, in its kind of blind inhabitation, starts to be an armature in which certain fundamental ideas on principles of logic are established. Some people will be inside that volume, others will be outside. There will be a sorting, in a concentric sorting of people, inevitably. These are inevitable kind of structures, and the sorting and classifying is a function of this material structure which has crystallized out of the landscape. And at a later stage, they're in the process of actually constructing, reconstructing some of these techniques of drawing that out, or and language builds against these. Who is inside? Who is outside? You name things which are sorted already by a wall. Certain materials or products are here, others there, and then this becomes translated into a thinking device. So also the relationship of the original crystallization and the ideal city plan. The ideal city plan is nothing but the slavish translation, and it had its own economy of translation in this geometry of the emerged city. That once, and that's quite important, once I have that drawing, which is crystallized in the division of labor in the building process, in the kind of construction process of architecture, crystallizes out. The drawing is a profound tool then of constructing this, and becomes a tool of representation, of thinking. It was originally crystallizes, because I think the original crisis in this direct material activity of constructing and controlling the construction of this shell will then become a schema of whatever is then called a kind of ordered thinking or presentation. Everything, every realm of experience, then would have to be slotted and organized as a city image. So these are, for instance, a figure of paradise and hell. There's a certain system of virtues or vices. If I want to think them through, what they are, my only means of that is to place them in an architecture. That means I know what hypocrisy is, that I know its place in that system of vices, as it were. Or also here, if I want to depict certain heavenly populations, as it were, I know them by placing them in an architecture, by distinguishing, by classifying, by ordering, by ranking. These are all, that is the key insight, which is very important. They are all desperately clinging and depending to and shackled by, from our perspective now, by a kind of primitive architecture, which is the only thinking device there is. But even if you look at quite later work, and let's say, and I maybe you should say one thing where some of these thoughts have originally been triggered. There's Mark Wigley's book Derrida's Horn, where he is reflecting on this kind of, but on an abstract kind of conceptual level, reflecting on the dependency of philosophy on architecture. He detects this by the strong presence of architectural metaphor in philosophy, where a philosopher would describe what he's doing as a kind of construction of a theoretical edifice. He would talk about of laying the foundations and then constructing certain arguments as kind of pillars of a kind of theoretical structure, and you would then have a kind of hierarchy of secondary elaborations and elements placed, and there's a certain logic in which one sees, and if one reflects, and philosophy is that, on general principles of discourse and thinking, one is clinging along and depends on an architectural notion of order. And it is at that stage inevitably a classical architecture one relies on. And we'll see that the tectonics of Kant's philosophical systems depend very much on certain symmetries, for instance, which we find today kind of arbitrary and surprising. Also, I think what is very important to realize is, and Wigley was pointing some of these metaphors out without really going back and looking at the drawings and the spatial occurrence of these philosophical texts. He's doing that on the level of metaphor. But there was an early kind of hint that there's something quite profound, level we as architects have on philosophy, which draws in people like Derrida, who feels that that is a realm where you can do philosophy with real force by elaborating directly upon those forms of order and categorizations which we never get out of, which we step into every morning, which we've been brought up in. If you can break it there, that's where habits of thought are engageable. And on another note, that one realizes that, okay, I'll come back to that. So if we're talking about, and Derrida is one of those who discusses the dependency on certain higher forms of discourse, for instance, on the book and on writing, that you wouldn't be able to think a kind of a Kantian system, for instance, outside of writing, as if the kind of writing is just the illustration of the previously thought. That is not the case. And we as architects, of course, know that the drawing is not just a kind of illustration of the closed my eyes previously thought. It's a kind of, we're clinging and carving through piles of drawings where the thinking takes place, and the same is with writing. And what the point I want to make here is that the book, which is the primary site since the late Renaissance of the way knowledge gets as brought to us, the way we kind of relate to it, is an architecture of which is strong, classical in ways which we currently undercut in the work we're doing. Ben is doing, we are doing. And that, for instance, something is seemingly inevitable and self-evident, that a text would come with a front cover, with a face, is something quite late. So you have an article by Panofsky that this kind of discourse used to come at one stage in roles, in texts which didn't have a title, a face, a clear partitioned being. So there's a discourse where we can start to see the book as a kind of transformation of something like the cathedral, or for me it's a building. Let's see the book as a building which has a facade, it has a singular point of entrance, it has an owner, the author. It will then open up into a series of chapters, and which are like rooms within a building. Each of those chapters will have one door by which you enter, which is the title of that chapters, and then and it will be a sequence, like a kind of palace structure. And you will have, and whenever we have, and that is no accident. That means that and all knowledge comes in that form. All knowledge comes in the form of a simple architecture, a simple building, which has only one entrance, which has a linear kind of chain of rooms. It has the order of subsumption of paragraph and subparagraph. And whenever we see something like that, which seems bizarre, one realizes what I call the formal a priori, that none of this packaging, which is crucial, which is what the thinking ultimately amounts to, of organizing the knowledge in a certain way, is an arbitrary architecture. So if you look at that they don't longer look like this, first pages. This is a symmetrical, bisymmetrical kind of way of presentation, and this kind of strange letter hierarchization. This is from, I think, from the New Organ of Bacon. So we want to be sensitive about the schemata in the way knowledge and information and also data in the end are presented to us. That data always come already with an architecture, so there's this kind of sense of a datascape as an architecturalization of a previous information or data is in a sense forgetting this reflexive loop of understanding that the data are always already an architecture. And that's their essence, is that they're an architecture. And so in terms of, for instance, these are interesting to reflect on. One of the major philosophers of the modern era, Kant, does something here which we now feel fetishistic. He's clinging to surface effects because he is absolutely insisting that the order of all thinking is finding its completion in coherence in that architectural figure, which looks like a Renaissance church. He cannot allow kind of an irregular architecture, which we are used to now, because it has crystallized, I would argue. We know architectures, institutions which have kind of an incomplete or kind of ponderated composition is not possible here to think. So there's only a sense of coherence in the theory if it fills a certain architecture. And we find that when I was, even a naive young students coming across that, I mean, that seems to be fetishistic. Why does it all have to kind of, why does this world have to fall into these places? I know now that I'm getting used to navigate orders, human orders, which are no longer like that. But he seems to be, he was absolutely shackled and bewitched. There couldn't be anything but this architecture. So, and that was at a time, of course, where any human organization would come in that form, and it was inevitable. But these are also material structures. These are certain stone structures. They are certain. The concentricity is maintained, and etc. So, so there is not an accidental relation. For instance, that you have the university would of course crystallize an institution only in a civilization which is architecture, in this case certain classical buildings, and that will be the inevitable organizing force of any institution, that the faculties will be or whatever the categories are will configure into a classical architecture. And that is called the formal a priori, which we always have to think and which we should break through, and there are really, I think, powerful advances to be made. And so here's another thing. We no longer do this because we find this kind of superstitious now, that the order of the universe or that this is a system of knowledge. If I'm able to plot my realm of experience into an architecture and find its place, and knowing specifics again is knowing its place in the architecture, and that's still the case. Again, we have certain factory communities, a kind of Ledoux design for certain factory, and we have certain organizational diagrams, and there is a formal a priori going where the something like an idea of an abstract organization, which we might, as architects, see ourselves being called upon to translate this organization into space, to make a kind of architectural interpretation of a previously organizational information or brief, which was given us by the organization expert, organization theorist, management theorist, leaves out, of course, that they are always already shackled by an architectural prejudice of what organization means to them. And I was testing that reflexive trope in a conference which was organized by Daimler-Benz, by kind of management theorists, that there could be something like a formal a priori, that they should kind of cut through their obsession to bring everything into these primitive architectures. And there was really some kind of sense of unease and that might be the case, that it is not a one-way street, the brief, then the architectural interpretation. Every brief you get as a written document is already a primitive architecture, whereby you have a building with a set of, let's say it comes as a piece of paper which partitions a series of paragraphs and chapters, and therefore it comes already with a kind of primitive organization. So here I'm going back even again further to compare very primitive human settlement patterns with the most elemental reconstruction of, or the most elemental and principal logical operations, which is on the one hand set theory group calculus, when in the philosophy of mathematics, or trying to think and reflect the foundations of mathematics, we're getting these diagrams, which are very similar also to Aristotle's logic, called the syllogisms, which principally, in terms of Aristotle, took the form of these kind of orders of subsumption. A logical conclusion is in effect something like this: all people of Athens are Greek, all Greeks are Europeans, therefore all people of Athens are Europeans. These are the kind of, that's a logical, that's a prime example of a logical conclusion, and you see how much it is a kind of boundary and sub-boundary organization. So here we have, what I'm arguing here is that the most primary operations of thinking, which is, let's say, distinction, classification, categorization, is an operation of the wall. The wall, of course, distinguishes, and that is a material practice. Let's say, as I said, in agriculture, certain crops or certain results of agriculture are sorted into storage, or again, communities are cut out of the landscape, then have subsets, and these have subsets. So this order of subsumption is precisely grafted off a material practice, as it were. And of course, it's been extremely kind of coherent and consistent, that if you look at the kind of logic of subsumption, meaning a series of a set and subsets and subsets and within subsets, it's a kind of a territory with a territory, and the territory a building on its site, which has then a series of levels, and that level has a kind of series of rooms. That's a very distinctive pattern, which is the arch pattern of classification hierarchy, and a set theoretical system, as it were. And Foucault is, of course, somebody who has been looking at that in his notion of the discursive formation, that a discourse, a kind of a certain science like the life sciences, is working itself up to a certain theoretical level through mechanisms like collections, which are a physical table. This table becomes then, that table is again, that follows that. The ability to lay out, to group, to shelve, and we're still talking about, pigeonholing as a kind of, and shelving, and as a kind of, in a metaphorical way, as a kind of too rigid a thinking, as it were. And there's another reflection, of course, that language, that how the world is received as and understood as ordered and classified depends on the schemata, on the grid in which I want to assimilate it. So that reflection on the kind of let's say, I would call the demiurgic force of these kind of apparatus of ordering experience that that is reflected on here. The different geometries and organizational kind of logics of in this case different languages would cut experience differently, and they are not necessarily translatable into each other, even if they all work in this case with kind of a quasi-shelving system. And I'm looking at another experience. This is now the science of biology and its original emergence. And as a kind of, and originally the main problem which biology set itself was classification, to build a classification system. And I think there is some relation, of course, with where you could nearly see these as kind of pseudo, how do you call it, cages, animal kind of herds and caged in, that this originally was just seen as a series of sets and realms and which are just sprinkled out, and we're starting to get here into a system whereby we have already this order of subsumption, a kind of hierarchical nesting of categories. And quite interestingly, that the kind of similarities, so similar was put into one kind of boundary, and then several of these which share certain identities are bounded again. That becomes a means of presenting, of thinking, that somehow the experience seems to exceed that schemata. And then we fall into this kind of crossing of links which might be similarities which I cannot simultaneously depict in that architecture. And that is the kind of problems we're working on today. How can I kind of elaborate more complex but still precise systems of architecturalization, meaning systems of order, of architecture, of organization? What are the schemata if they're no longer, shouldn't be any longer reducible to the simplest architecture? You know, and in a sense we have them already. Whatever we as a discipline the last 10 years have elaborated on formal repertoires, on graphic spaces, on architectures, these might be the diagrams which now might construct knowledge or might cohere experience, might be the schemata through which we now understand organization. This way around, the architects have leapt in front, as it were, and the vanguard, I would argue, of and of course these schemata would have to be kind of tested in how much grip they get onto certain processes, and that's what we're doing in the business organization projects where the architecture itself becomes a kind of organizing force and a tool of social imagination, etc. Going back again, the book, again what I said before, even in those sciences like catastrophe theory or combinatorics, which is precisely elaborating more complex structures, when it wants to summarize itself as an overall theory, it falls back onto a kind of simple architecture of a series of chapters with a singular heading. So there's a lack of reflection on the formal a priori of their own presentation. I think this is also interesting. This is another kind of architecture which has a slightly more complex order, a kind of multi-layered hierarchical order of subsumption, which is more formalized than usually. I mean, you can see here that this is from Hegel's history of philosophy, and I couldn't show it all, but you have kind of parts, and then parts fall into sections, and each section falls into A, B, C, and then up there then these numbers sometimes have the kind of small ABC, etc. So you can see that what he's using to grapple with a large realm of experience, in this case, of philosophy of history, he's working with this kind of hierarchically nested architecture. That's the way he plots it out. And I think that it's not just an illustration. If you want to go back to it, if you want to kind of represent or summarize or apply, you will always navigate as if walks through this chapter structure. That's the way that's what you cling to, I would argue, more than anything else. And knowing who this guy is knowing his place in the building, who he's next to, who he's distinguished on by the first order of walls, etc. And then we have to realize, if knowing this guy is knowing his place in the architecture, that this whole game of knowing anybody, a philosopher, is prejudiced, what it boils down to is prejudiced by the architecture. Now, who says that knowing this guy has to depend on this architecture we have certainly long since surpassed? I mean, look at the kind of projects we're doing. So again, there's some examples that architecture as sorting machine, and sometimes it doesn't it comes out a bit strange, where the repertoire is too primitive for things, where you have men, women, and doctors. And something is not quite working out, but still, again, the architecture is primary, then the organization is dependent on it. And here another view where I say we don't have to. It's not maybe so significant always only to look at the plan view, but to look at a kind of figure and the way rooms are not only distinguished from each other, the way they are accessible to each other, which chains them into a certain organization, which is then mapped by these kind of graphs. This was one major chapter on the topic of architectures of thought, architectures of thinking, as dependent on let's say segmented and nested architectures, orders of subsumption. And there's a second formal principle. So this is derived from the idea of territories and walls and boundaries, all this classification stuff. And it's also, let's say, on the city. Here is the city, and it has certain districts, and within the districts you have certain buildings, and within the building. So it goes also larger than the kind of building into a city. This is another formalism which comes from not the wall but from the path. So which is, in this case, if I should go through this quickly, there's a kind of another metaphor which one has plot information against, which is a tree in effect. But these kind of classification trees, another way of organizing. A definition would be then a series of kind of branchings, a series of distinctions which are nested. You have these kind of conceptual structures which take traditionally then very soon this kind of tree-like structure. And that is, for instance, we will talk later on that to a certain extent this formalism of branching is translatable or isomorphic with the group calculus of territorial nesting. This is, for instance, the famous encyclopedia of the French Enlightenment, and is part of a graph depicting the totality of human understanding. And it is also this kind of you can see that these kind of the brackets are like kind of bounding and sub-bounding, but it's also, you can see here the kind of the branching figure in there, and the way organizations, business organizations again, come back to this topic, are based on that branching formalism very much. So that in that sense, knowing something is knowing its place in a conceptual order, which is derived of a building where we kind of navigate relations in built structures. We have a notion of order as such. What is order? And there has been a formula by a very famous management theorist, Henry Fayol. Order is to know everything in its place and a place for everything. And that is and how am I describing a place? What are my options to describe a place? Well, let's think about it. It is either an order of subsumption, which is I am in the Berlage, in this room, which is in that building, which is in Amsterdam, which is in Holland. That's what. So order is knowing everything in its place and a place for everything. How to describe a place? It is this kind of through boundaries, or it is knowing the position in that tree, through which kind of line of this menu structure of going down the branching will finally reveal on which branch and sub-branch I am to be placed. So I come now to the architectural origin of what I call these kind of diagrams, which we all habitually pick up. If you want to diagram something, we either, and that is also in business theory, as I said before, you either make kind of boxes and distinguish from other boxes with boxes and boxes, or we draw elements and lines between elements. The world, the order and structure of the world boils down into nodes and links between nodes. That's very typical. And there's a whole science, network analysis, which is based on that formalism, and my argument would be it is a path. So there's a wall, and then there's a path which starts to link these nodes which crystallize out in the town countryside metabolism in the medieval settlement patterns. You will start to have connections. You have certain casual trade. The system doesn't depend on that anymore. This then becomes formalized. Let's say, like the concentric system was formalized in the ideal city. You have in Rome. You start to have a kind of node link formalism in the structure of the city. And it's also important, therefore, that first graphics, that's something like maps, early pieces of graphics, would be tracing a certain travel, would give me a series of points. It will be a sequence of points, a series of links between points that will be the description of a certain travel I went through, and it will later on become maybe a description for everything. All descriptions look like that, either like kind of this series of boundaries in which things are classified, or it looks like, let's say certain events I've gone through is enlisting points along a path or nodes as a chain, and I think this. Well, I don't have to show much of those. How incredibly powerful and ubiquitous this way of diagramming is. That the world is supposed to, and any conceivable order is an order if I can boil it down into nodes which are within certain relationships, like kind of cities along street systems. Also, this I will argue. Let's say, if I want to reflect on what is a process, a very profound process in human thinking, like a decision-making process, or what does it mean to kind of plan out a meaningful and rational conduct in formalized decision analysis, this is like going through what they call a decision tree. That is going down a kind of road, as it were, and at a certain moment having a primary decision. It's like a branching. Which road do I go down? I make this choice, and then I have another kind of series of options. Go this choice, and if I think about it, what a decision is, it has this structure. It is decomposed into the series of junctions, as it were, along which I navigate. That's the way I picture it for myself. Well, here we have another kind of formalism, another attempt, quite curiously, in logic, and attempt to formalize a kind of logical system that it would not be a kind of algebra which is a simple line, but an algebra which would unfold across the page two-dimensionally through a series of branches and branchings. This is Frege at the turn of the century. And don't you have that image? There are pages which are whole sentences which unfold across with a kind of pattern of branching, and that is a certain statement. A certain statement will take that form. I find that quite interesting and significant. And so I had to make a cut at that stage and say that is presenting to ourselves the way enormous amount of what the horizon of the higher forms of thinking was in terms of its formula a priori. Everything had to be brought down, had to be kind of organized and fitted in to these architectures. Now, that is still the case here, that you would have the ontology is still nodes and links between nodes. But there's a first moment which we find interesting also, and I use these diagrams also a lot to sensitize ourselves as architects that what a more complex order could be. It still works with nodes and links, let's say in these two, but instead of having the clean singular kind of branching order, and we have on the left hand side we have two systems operating on the same in the same territory for two populations. On the left-hand image, there is that a population occupying that region which measures, which commutes to a center and would measure its position against that center and would occupy that space along that pattern. Whereas another kind of indigenous population, this is kind of a professional population, that region, and another population which is occupying that territory like this. It doesn't see at all that big ball. It doesn't measure itself against it. So we wanted to introduce a discourse, hint at a discourse that in today's society we have with multiple audiences, etc., that we will encounter complex mechanisms which, if looked at with the schemata of still kind of nodes and links, etc., would not be reducible to what science wants to reduce everything into at the moment. Still, mostly a kind of a clean, symmetrical or tree order of things. And I want to also sensitize you, if you're talking about links and nodes formalisms to conceive of we know that these kind of network diagrams, you could network IKEA as you did today, but you could also they are universal theoretical tools of depicting. You've seen these kind of diagrams in any kind of science, as it were. And what we're looking at, and the funny thing is that usually there is a kind of insistence on that I finally kind of understand it if it boils down to a fairly rigid, simplistic network. Now this is something which is worthwhile looking at, which is the mathematics of combinatorics, which investigates a whole series of measures and distinctions in these kind of network systems. Now, if you look at somebody like Christopher Alexander, who has been very important, and we'll show some images later, of introducing a kind of reflection on systems of order, which was quite late, of course, as a kind of category to kind of elaborate upon. He made a distinction between the tree, kind of simplistic order of subsumption, and what he called the lattice. That was how far his theory went. That was the kind of degree of differentiation he could kind of come up with. We have trees and we have non-trees, and the city is no longer a tree, was his claim, but not much else he was able to say about it. So there was everything which wasn't a tree was called a lattice, but what this might help us, that lattices come in various with various measures, which we can ask how many kind of levels it has, how symmetrical or asymmetrical the levels are, how the ramification, proliferation at each branch, etc. And just, I don't want to elaborate too much, but that's, I think, an interesting realm where we could kind of gather a lot of sophistication and repertoire of distinction versus tropes of organizing space and also thinking relations. And I show you on the left-hand side something kind of I did on that respect, very simple attempt at a network typology, which I should always one might, if one starts discussing network organizations, will have in one's back of one's mind that, and what the differences would be in between let's say a star system and a branching system right next to it, or a spine, is that on the one hand they have their economy, which is quite interesting. That means there's a sense whereby you can see on the left-hand side the direct system, of course, which will give you an immediate access from any point. At the other point, will have an enormous amount, a lack of economy in terms of street space or link space to be covered. Whereas a star is fairly economical in this way, and still links all the points. All the same points are linked. But then again, through the economy, I buy a certain social charge. Nearly, I have a certain order imposed, meaning there's suddenly a kind of hierarchy and a central point, which of course the direct connections don't have, which the grid doesn't have, which the ring doesn't have, etc. And the branching has a kind of 3 levels of such special points in an order and that what is important here to see, and that's where I come also to the point of social organization. These are conceptual schemata, they are spatial organizers, and they have a kind of social charge. So if we assume a kind of population which would move into a kind of branching system versus a kind of grid system, that there's a certain inevitable hierarchy and distribution of spaces to be occupied. It will initially inevitably kind of call forth certain identities created. The guy who occupies, or the function which occupies that node is marked out, is also scrambled for that position, is the one which reproduces best, etc. So that you can see what I would here discuss is, again, not that these kind of organizational structures, which might crystallize out of economy, have certain social implications. There's a kind of demiurgic world-making, social world-making force in these, right? If you are, this is a sense of an originating, it creates identities, it creates classes and positions in a social, in that social body which occupies that versus that. Again, going back to Christopher Alexander, who is one of the sources which really was very important for gradually kind of elaborating this kind of way of seeing things is showing again, what he's showing quite nicely is there's some kind of sense in which these two forms of schemata of logic and space are translatable into each other. That the top node represents a total group, the whole tree, which then has two sub-realms, one of which has two elements, the other one has another sub-element. But you see that these are translatable into each other. This was I talked before in the studio about very simple mathematics, and here we're having a slightly more complex system which he offers. He says this no longer works. Society is no longer like that, where traditional society would be like that, where everybody, where who I'm group with, let's say my friends, we are all in this group and only in that group on that level. That my friends are also all are each other's friends, and there's no kind of crossover and overlap, and that these friends are all in this village, and in all respects, work, free time, religion, we all share this in all respects. This is kind of simplistic model, let's say, which is the spatial model of a feudal order and village, is no longer like that. We know that we have that our social relations are such that we are always intersecting various groups and realms, where I'm a few and a few others might be the only ones who are in that intersection, and that is. For the first time, he says a city should start to look like this. We keep kind of planning cities in that way, and we should introduce a richer organization. This is not chaos. In traditional logic, this would be, or let's say, a sensibility of an order. I want to structure in an ordered, known, rational way. This is just pure chaos. He says, no, this is a higher form of organization, a more complex form of organization, where knowing somebody's place, meaning knowing who he is no longer unambiguous, but is multiple. There's no one answer to where he is. He is here at the intersection of various things, and you can trace him through various trees. And that is, I think, significant when we're coming to, in this part of the lecture, to expand about our repertoire of what we call order, what we call schemata of representing information, of structuring, of understanding situation, that these architectures which organize information for us might be of a more complex nature. So we're having the matrix, and that is also reflected in business organization theory itself, where they realize, to a certain extent, that this idea of a business organization is not anymore fulfilled as that you have a very, very singular line of command and singular set of competence breakdown, and but that you have a matrix. That every employee in the matrix his place is kind of doubly aligned and affiliated. Most typically that you are part of a team as well as part of a discipline. Let's say in an organization, in architecture, you could say that you're part of that you're a multidisciplinary kind of organization. You're part of a multidiscipline, but you're also still a part of a discipline. So, and that is for us was quite challenging. But the architecture, which we think knows this long time ago, and we are further. But the real architecture, when you mean the mass architecture, wouldn't be able even to translate that. We'll fall back into that system, and never mind that they would want to start seeing some kind of this set of relations that we are well placed to give them that. That's our initial kind of impetus also to say, with that formal research of the last 15 years, we should approach this realm of very important realm of social reproduction and offer solutions which have been elaborated. And these kind of studies of of realms, and which I can also characterize through intrinsic kind of qualities, field qualities and textures. And I create overlap. I create the binary overlaps, the bit in the middle, and which assumes a kind of third emergent logic, or very important. I'm sorry, this is upside down. I'm now going through the kind of principles of architectural order, which have been elaborated in architecture in the last 10 to 15 years as quite profound breakthroughs and tools of order and organizing. And one key element is this, and that took really a long time. I mean, when that you would be able to superimpose as a Colos project one order right upon another. I mean, this is a kind of incredible audacity and breakthrough at the time. Or you have something like this in the La Villette, maybe most clearly, that you wouldn't. The game is no longer to place territories next to each other. A field A, then field B can start, and maybe that is subdivided. That you have one kind of structure and order placed, and the game is no longer. It was inevitably the case that what you do next is you play something beside, that you actually impose another operation. I think that is a kind of a mind-boggling breakthrough and expansion of the repertoire, which means that, again, that the place, that when I am moving into that park, the Parc de la Villette, that when I'm trying to understand where I am in it, and I want to meet somebody, that is an ambiguous question, that I actually have the option that this place is latent with 3 systems of reference, 3 systems of locating, 3 systems of distinction. I could kind of lodge onto, I could see myself as at one of these points in the point grid, and I could also see myself and forget that and see myself in the triangle, the circle, or rectangle, which are these kind of broken figures, as totally indifferent and independent system of reference, or on one point along a kind of squiggly line. That, I think, is a profound analog or model of organization that an institution, a kind of a realm of experience, a territory, and I'm using that as a kind of thinking device, is simultaneously structured in independent and quite diverse logics. And coming back to recent attempts to tackle also the direct space in which information is given to us, in something like Any Magazine, where one says, okay, let's reflect upon something like the magazine. Instead of having one facade and title, I have 2 and flip around. Instead of having kind of one singular hierarchical breakdown in the chapters and sub-chapters, I have kind of certain sentences and paragraphs reassociated in a system of overlap. Basically, we still have paragraphs and sets in the system of overlap. And just as another reference, and just to see this various kind of projects which have been working with layering. This is a kind of layering, a very, very dense layering project in terms of constructing the city through a series of systems in Columbia University a few years back with Zahadid and myself, and that these layers are kind of initially indifferent upon each other. We have different competing systems of order, structuring space and elements, and that the next level of that investigation that these start to inflect each other, that these start to engage in a dialectic. And I have to speed up a little bit, and that on the level of graphic design, this is still very playful. This doesn't carry much real information yet, but it's a kind of outlook on finding more complex graphic structures to think through. And let's say in science systems where science are given a meaning in 2 chains and 2 systems of distinctions, the crossing point, or cubist paintings where elements have suddenly flip into totally different entities. The world breaks down, and where this guitar hole is suddenly the top plate on a pile of plates, and the body of the guitar is suddenly the chair pushed against the table, and the guitar disintegrates. Some of the things which might be armature of the guitar are glasses and pipes, etc. These kind of multiple associations, multiple configurations simultaneously operating and being oscillated between. This is another thing where I would say that one major force in let's say the history of the sciences is the museum, is the display of the summary display of certain research, certain art history museums or natural history museums. This is a formatting force. This kind of tables and shelving and partitioning of that universe of elements. And we've been working here on an exhibition design where we try to organize in space information in a more complex fashion. Instead of having this kind of singular chapterization we'll have in that wish machine project, a series of walls which are entities in their own right, which traverse space from a kind of central point of entrance, which would carry certain themes, certain threads, in which elements are associated along a storyline. And of course, these walls create a series of rooms in which each of them could be seen as an entity and identity, where elements which are in that room belong together and are subsumed under a category. So each element belongs both to a wall and to a room. That is easy enough, because the way we articulated the walls as entities. And there's another kind of armature going where we have a total color effect of grayscaling, where there was a dark side and a bright side and a spectrum and gradient location of elements. And that therefore, for instance, here, of course, certain elements, like the robot families, were part of a wall story of systems of orders, which would talk about orchestras and armies and collectives, and would at the same time be part of a story which talks about machines and flying objects and science fiction figures. Just like that. So there's an attempt here to and the museum, I think, is a good site. It's a site of engagement between what information is, structured information. I mean, information is always structured and direct instrumentalization of a spatial, a three-dimensional spatialization. And I think that I'm not sure how you feel about time, because I'm not doing too well. So what I'll do at that stage is I will preface now a kind of race through a series of organizations, which are all, of course, spatial organizations, graphic organizations, which I would propose a hypothesis, possible schemata to get to know and inhabit as information organizers. And so these are, I'm just racing through a series of organizational structures, and invite you to see them as such complex organizational structures, rather than disorder and chaos. A multiple association of. So I'm just showing this kind of conditions of overlap and semi-boundaries and conditions of multiple affiliation and this is a complex organization. Reagan Thatcher. Multiple affiliation where this block here is one kind of entity and falls apart into various associations where it's no longer unity. The middle one is the extension of the main nave there, and the side elements create kind of fall apart and associate with and this trope, which it's quite interesting if you see some of these images now, that I'm not sure how familiar I'm with certain tropes which are ongoing right now, that you have a kind of collage, an aggregation of discrete elements which are then filtered through a kind of evening and cohering medium. Again, here in the water pavilion, you have the kind of figure ground play where object crystallization is then kind of countered and undercut or overrode by kind of cohering and smoothing and affiliating textures. This kind of topological figures. Not to see them as the absence of order and chaos and not knowing where I am, but asking the questions, what are the descriptions through which I can locate myself, who can talk about an organization here. Also, these kind of fields, I would argue field space, and where the elements crack and fragment to a point where I know myself only through kind of maybe relative directionalities or densities and organizations which have a different ontology, which don't determine places or links and lines, but which operate by distributing field qualities maybe and trajectories and gradient changes, etc. It's a totally different way of suggestive of a different way of distinguishing areas. When they're no longer areas, they're kind of structures of space, which we got to test each of these to understand what it means to describe where I am, or how I'm describing what a kind of movement here, which is no longer operating by places, but by means which we don't have much language of, but where we can construct the language as we start to inscribe processes in them and use them of backdrops upon we cling and certain ourselves about certain as structure, and the way we for instance try to or graphic systems try to offer these. Of course, we not inhabit these yet with the same ease and control and reproducibility entities which don't deviate from a kind of well-trodden path lightly, want to think themselves like that now. That means this can no longer count as chaos. This is the latest form of organization. Will take these kind of ontology and morphology. We're talking about half figures, broken figures, nested figures, bleeds, interpenetrations, morphs. That's what the world organization theory is toying and playing and groping for the kind of things we are playing with. And then I'm saying with these, this is no play. This seems to be where at the peak, I would say, of civilization progress and a kind of high-tech and advanced management and industry circles is something which is kind of craved for, as it were. And this is now, and I won't talk much about it, the Rome project, which I did with Zaha Hadid, and the latest Build project, to show how we are trying to operate some of these tropes in a real condition, kind of field space organization, which distributes directions, densities, orientations, grain shifts, certain distributes and certain secondary effects of overlap conditions, and want to offer that as the organization of what will become the museum for 21st century, contemporary and then 21st century art. And of course, what is funny here, interesting here, is that the very realm to be organized, contemporary art, is in flux and it depends also on institutional armatures which kind of reflect it, posit it, collect it. That this will be kind of will become a kind of demiurgic machines if it comes through. And it is curious here that the architecture takes a lead in the creation of that institution. But we're just throwing in formalisms and organizational patterns which we feel are worthwhile to be experimented with. And art is still, I think, one of those areas where experimentation can be offered without the harsh existential reproduction criterion upon it. I don't want to say too much about this because I'm running late. So it's a sense that we have drifts, trajectories, densities, orientations, but we also have objects and realms, but they kind of tangle and bleed and reassociate. Things we know, I guess, and it's just one more project which tries to offer that as in this case something which is on the agenda to be realized. Sections. We're quite interested in that, in these kind of textures and zones of multiple kind of association, which we distribute. This is the project which attempts some of these formalisms. It's about figure ground, the bleeding, the disappearance of the building into a landscape. It's also about a series of conditions of intersection, overlap, and the offering of a different public space, which is about no longer congregation, aggregation, centralization, but seeing, passing, flowing across each other with a kind of proliferation of visual participation, let's say, in that flow model. Okay, that's it. I'm sorry. I felt kind of inclined to rush that last section, but I think the key message was anyway in the earlier statement about the kind of the profound force which architecture is in terms of constructing social universes, but also constructing conceptual universes, and that we reflect that dimension and pose ourselves confidently with these new repertoires as having a lot to offer at the moment. Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Patrick.
Yeah.
Any question or comment? Maybe when you said, sorry,
Yeah.
I'm really angry on the Swiss usually Swiss should be quite slow. But when you said that we are losing the language at a certain point to describe things,
Yeah.
and that by analyzing things, one is constructing a new language. The new language still would be a language, right?
Yeah.
So you've been doing a lot of experiments in DRL, which is Design Research Laboratory, with the students. So how far you are, again, excuse me, I missed the moment of the lecture. How far you are in a construction of something which seemingly would be a new language to describe these processes and these not only organizational patterns, but obviously something which is new, therefore not describable with the standard sort of logical conclusions, or linguistic, not logical.
Yeah. I think what the main task which we set ourselves when we took up from Kipnis is that while the kind of formal research and proliferation of patterns and spaces continues, the primary task is now to read into those specific realms of experience which we took from the kind of recent business organization, because we want to be relevant, because we don't want to kind of invent areas which are not vital. I mean, and also because we saw in the literature that the terms they use, the kind of graphics they start to want to get at, are very prone. So that our main agenda is to be, before being even more formally inventive, to redeem, as it were, and to fill with meaning, and to try to hook stories to these new patterns and textures and spaces by trying to fill with an organizational process, and it works. I mean, it really works because becomes very quickly obvious that, for instance, a lot of organizations, if you're talking about diagrams which can overlap, yes, of course, there are lots of people positions which are organizationally described as such. For instance, or that we have the breakdown of the hermetic boundary of the corporation itself. The way they have franchise, and then they have kind of loose suppliers and the market only. That these are spectral, these are gradients. We therefore have the ontology of gradients, but their diagrams don't have these, so they can't measure, they can't summarize the discourse succinctly, because they lack but we bring those graphics to them, and they like it. I've tested that much. They like it very much. So we are in the business of making sense, making operative as thinking machines these graphics and the buildings. The buildings, of course, are thinking machines themselves in their own right. Then, and they also test that the two-dimensional is no longer necessarily always to be privileged. I mean, it has a lot to do with the materiality of printing and stacking and sending. But we actually directly, of course, three-dimensional becomes the diagram, and we trying to, of course, also keep up to date with. So we're working with animations, dynamic diagramming. But our emphasis, what is unique about us, I would argue, is that on top of the formal repertoires, which others are doing at Columbia, etc., that we actually were able to map a meaning life process into these and become articulate about a life process through those in this dialectic. Of course, it's difficult, but it's about kind of because these things you have to kind of try to describe something as you move with your finger. This diagram, which doesn't have lines anymore, but that is what we're trying to do, and therefore we're trying to construct buildings and make an effort to describe how they categorize, organize, etc. That's the main thing, main effort.
So a question about, you've shown us a lot of very beautiful two-dimensional diagrams, and you've shown us very three-dimensional buildings. So So I wonder what would happen when you would think about 3 or 4 dimensional diagrams and then put them into buildings. The second question is, what do you think about accidents that happen in the models or in the diagrams or in the buildings?
Accidents. Yeah. I think that everything, to a certain extent, once was an accident, right? It's that's what the evolution does. I mean, this was a foot once. I mean, we use it like the first schemata are arbitrary architectures used to think. How crazy! Like this is a foot used to do something else. This is a mouth which suddenly speaks, which wanted only to eat. So everything is accidental. And there is a progress of mutation, selection, reproduction, which I would say, and I would assimilate cultural evolution to these kind of biological evolution, and the progress in thinking of the same. Science operates like this as well. So I think accidents, are accidents and stumble upon as long as they are not then selected and reproduced. Accidents become parts of methods, retrospectively. So that is it's like so initially a lot of these things are accidental, groping, but of course we also strategically kind of randomize them, and it's a bit like brainstorming in companies. These are now accepted modes of rationality that you actually accidentalize, because it's the only way to innovate. Just knowing what one does at every moment fully means you are in a cycle of repetition, which is good. 99% or 95% of what we do will be within a cycle of repetition. But evolution can only be explained if there's some kind of breakthrough, some initial leap, some other, but which luckily is kind of happens a few times and is kind of then latched on and methodized. So I don't have a problem with that. And so what is or isn't an accident will surface. And I think that also this a lot of this game of kind of bringing out these textures, and we know what we do. We are strategic in this sense. There's some kind of gradient, some kind of interpretation overlap, some kind of. And then we also talk, you want to expose yourself to very strange things, which are still chaotic to you. Crumbling of paper and then saying, how can we break this down? It's a challenge. These are engines of invention, I would argue. It's a bit like, it then becomes like coffee cup reading. You know what I mean? So where things are no longer an accident, because suddenly you can kind of, and that's what I would say. So we have reflected that accident is a mode of innovation under circumstances which know also about the need to then kind of reproduce and systematize that type of thing.
Yeah, I have one question concerning part of the lecture which was describing urban patterns and the diagrams next to it. So you were showing urban patterns of medieval city. And at that moment you said, and now I'm trying to put in a parallelistic point. You were showing that city, and you were saying that actually it is self-organizational process which is going on in the city at that time. After that, people start pretending. So I'm wondering if you said like that you are looking for life processes. Isn't it in a way like it was in medieval time? Actually, cities were planned by themselves, not by architects or planners. Some cities. So I would like to hear your comment on it.
You mean today it's like this again?
Yeah, like you said, that basically you are searching for life processes to accommodate within your diagrams. machine away. I'm metaphorically speaking, but I wonder, is it possible to kind of describe it more clearly what it could be in terms of self-organization, like force?
Okay, you mean, I'm not sure exactly what you refer to, but the project like the Rome project, or projects like you look up in Daedalus, some of these kind of DRL projects, which give you a kind of complex three-dimensional organization, I claim. But our problem a lot of times is that we are speechless in describing this. And when I talk about this speculatively inhabiting it with the life process, is starting to describe patterns, start talking about it, start imagining modes of inhabitation which are recursive. That's what I mean by that means, for instance, and these are thought experiments, but they have a reality. For instance, instead of the coffee cup, right, where I kind of read in figures into, I did with Zaha that studied at Columbia University and in the Hamburg Art Academy about reading and describing landscape formations, forests, mountainscapes. It's a take forest or jungle, and throw yourself in there and try to think through where you would be, how would you navigate this, right? Here it's clear where I locate myself geographically in terms of territories. I'm in this building, I know where it is, it's a boundary. And there I don't have a kind of a clear boundary, an object I can name. I have a kind of a field. It's a bit like throwing yourself into what is field space like. I want to tell a story about being in field space, imagining a life in field, where I don't know myself by giving my place I'm in that territory, which is in that territory, which is in that territory, but otherwise. So if that means I might be because I don't have a nameable territory, I might be moving along it in where clearing seems to become more frequent, or with the light, or I'm moving. It's a bit like Deleuze is describing also kind of a certain nomad landscape where the space is structured not by points which are fixed, and the line is then defined as I'm moving from A to B, which are fixed. So what means fixed? Fixed means being part of an architecture. On that line, the third, or in that grid, that. Otherwise, I have nothing I latch onto, nothing I could kind of structure except the following. That maybe I'm following a herd because I'm living on it. My trajectory is defined not geographically, not the way we use it. It's defined by, and this herd is following the kind of the vegetation, and so on. This structures a space, but it's mind-boggling. So if I'm talking about a depersonalized office space, a really deep interior, where I'm not given my room anymore, which they start to experiment with. I'm coming in with a mobile phone, and there's a kind of rich texture, and I'm navigating this field space, and I'm meeting somewhere. Or how do I go through my day? I mean, I might have a sense. I'm not going to a meeting room which is on that level in that space, which is mine, but I might have to. I did some kind of work by myself, and I moved in the territory towards kind of isolated, intimate zones and settle down. I never know where I am in the traditional sense. I don't need to know. I don't care to know. Then I need to kind of talk something through. I'm gravitating towards a cafeteria zone or something like this, or navigate certain qualities. And I never name a territory. I never name a property. I never cross a line or lock path, because I know I meet people there I can talk to through something, anybody. So this is what I mean by scenario imagination, a life process which works on a totally different spatial diagram. But the world consists of other things, so totally ontology. Of course, there's also a coordinate system, where somebody else says, later on, this person went from square A to square B. Or you could always impose that, but this is not an operator. From within, from the life process, the world has a different logic, has a different spatial logic, has a different ontology, but it's also, of course, different social agents. It's, for instance, premised on depersonalized space. But that's what I mean, suddenly, that I'm projecting a life process into another kind of graphic space, which doesn't give me what I would require in order to know myself in the usual way. I need to know where I'm supposed to sit, where my desk is, or where's the kind of drafting department. If I don't have that, what do I do? And that is quite challenging. I think that's the kind of thing. So
But the critique to the latest,
would come that it is a kind of de-ideologized approach, the kind of social aspect, at least at the part of the process, is a bit put aside, that precisely because of the self-life organizing principles, we kind of lose perhaps possibility to inscribe a particular, social values.
Well, I think it hasn't been emphasized enough. I mean, of course, if I would draw the balance sheet of what emphases are, and I speak for myself, I'm thinking a lot about social structures and political structures and so on. And in the studio, that is partly there, partly not there, and so on. But I would say yes, that for instance, this space I was just describing is also challenging very much the composition of society. These territorialization, these kind of strict lines are creating identity, meaningful distinctions, territorialization. Imagine that is taken away. At the workplace, I'm suffering that. I no longer have my place. But in real life, of course, I have these other thought experiments. Imagine you coming out of the, you wake up in the morning. First of all, this architecture reminds you that you are a family, that the world, that the bathroom, and so these are memory structures. Who you are, what you're supposed to do. The bathroom, the kitchen, you have to eat and go out, and then you're out. Imagine you step out of your house, and on your front lawn is a picnic by somebody who is sitting there having a picnic, smiling at you, and doesn't accept that's you and your territory. You can imagine in this thought experiment how you don't no longer know what's going on, who you are, how this violation of a boundary, how brutally this is defended everywhere. You can't cross any threshold, and if you do it, your world falls apart. How much you cling to this architecture, you wouldn't know who you are. And if your right is challenged, that this is your front garden, it is kind of, of course you will call the police immediately and the thing will be clarified. But imagine that isn't available. I mean, you see how much, so I'm thinking that is highly social. And another thought experiment is that if you go into this company, where I just said, you navigate qualities and you contribute work, and people are not in the same way identities the way they used to be. Because they were identities because they were sitting in that room. They would occupy this competency. They would own that. That is eroded. And what if and it's very interesting in the internet, what it does to identity and this other space of communication. And Pierre Levy is talking about what he calls a kind of anthropological space, the fourth anthropological space. And he's going through stages of social structure, where the first tribal kind of tribal structure will lead to something like a name. I'm of that genealogy. I carry that name and as an identity. And I'm saying there's a next settlement, the area of settlement, where I'm determined by my place. I'm belonging to this. And if I look at my CV now, I still have a name which relates to that. I still have a kind of address. And the next, which and it's very powerful. That imagine in the Middle Ages who you were. It was, you were so tied to the soil, to the village, which was tied to, the feudal laws, representing a larger village. It is incredibly territorial what somebody is and what your rights of access is. That suddenly classifies and establishes structure and identity. And it is no longer, it's different from the nomad type. Now the next stage is industrialization. You uproot it. This, even nationality anymore. Do I care? Do I know? Does it matter? But that was, you had to leave the village for the first time. Who are you? You're drawn into the industrial city. You are suddenly re-established identity by profession, by the division of labor occupation. That's why we have name, address, architect, occupation. And now Levy is saying this is eroded because these categories disappear. I'm an architect for 4 or 5 years, 10 years, and then I have to be something else. So there is this kind of sense of erosion, and I think in the company you have that sense. You have that sense that the space is taken away from you, your clear competency is taken away, where companies say, I'm hiring you not to be the second assistant, the marketing department of, I'm hiring, they hire people to find and self-define trajectories, careers, tasks, etc. So there's a very powerful social dimension, and that requires certain spaces. Because this self-organization of certain tasks and competencies and communication patterns which you establish cannot take place in an armature where everybody in its place and a place for everybody. So this can only take place in space, and a lot of times we have large, open, neutral spaces, empty spaces, which are not challenging, which are not creative of organizational substrate. I'm falling back into old patterns. So what we're trying to do is this kind of aleatoric process where the spatial, accidental structure is also a machine to trigger social imagination. But we know the ontologies we reject, which is the one of the war, dichotomy, the hierarchical, singular breakdown, and all of that. But it's deeply social. To the point of a kind of root sense of individuality, collectivity, etc. So, and it's deeply political, because this is taking place. These are experiments which work. That's the way things get done. That's the way you create the next kind of advanced software packages with these textures and spaces and relations. But they really cut at the social order because. After all, this kind of realm of self-organization is known, is placed, so and there are very strong limits, of course, politically, also internally. How far can you go? Who is risking to experiment with these structures? But I think what I like about it is an exciting field, where I think where a lot of social progress is made, a lot of social experiment, a lot of these things are going on that level, interestingly enough. So that's why we're looking at that area of the social process, which I think is maybe the most dynamic one.